What's happening, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to the Crash Bang Boom podcast. I'm your host, Jody Smith. Got a great guest for the 52nd episode today in Lev Weinstein. Or if he was down south, he could be Leverage Weinstein. But that's not the case. I just thought that was an interesting name variation. Lev is a killer drummer who plays in many bands around town, not the least of which is Krallice, Pyrolatris, Garyon, Anacon, Woe. He recently did a run with Zeal and Ardour as the backing band because his band couldn't come over from Switzerland, so only the lead vocalist could, who had dual citizenship, and they were the backing band. So Lev gets into that, as well as teaching, shredding, rehearsing, recording, creating, blasting, all kinds of stuff. Dude is certainly not at a loss for an array of gigs. But we get into Indiana Jones-themed thrash bands, children's books, legal weed, playing drums in a Manhattan apartment, shredding long-form blast beats, his blind piano teacher, the joys and knowledge that come with teaching, and even collaborating with Dave Edwardson of Neurosis. So there's no shortage of awesomeness in this one. So here we go. Without further ado, Crash Bang Boom! All right, Lev Weinstein or Weinstein, depending on where you're from or who you talk to. Holy shit, what's going on, man?
Not too much. Yourself?
I'm good, man. And it's a little bit of a rainy day here in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, but we're high and dry, so that's good. Yeah. No hurricane threat presently.
Not at the moment.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about this recent gig that you played with this guy who I'm already spacing on his name after you just told me it. I smoked too much weed when I was in Seattle, so
hey, man,
I'm fucking a little brain dead.
It's legal and incredibly dangerously easy to come by.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It's cheap. It's two mad scientists out there.
It's for $10, and I was smoking weed. I was giving weed away like I was on a barter system to bartenders.
You can't leave with it. But also, this shit just gets scary because it's so mad scientists. Like, it's another thing. I feel like when my parents were like, it's not like in the 60s, you have to be careful.
No, shit, it's not.
And it's like, it's not like out here. It's fucking insane.
There's a lot of strains of weed out there.
Yeah, and they all kick my ass.
Yeah, the whole experience blew my mind because I hadn't been to one, and I got there early and was burning some time, and I was like, well, you know what? I'll just go burn some time at bars because being from like New Orleans, Southeast Louisiana, bars open early, you know, or just fucking stay open 24/7. So none of the bars were open. So I was like, well, where's the weed joint around here? So I went and found that one, and yeah, that was badass. I just found a couple of names that sounded interesting. I was like, I'll just go for that. I don't know shit about weed that much.
I think you can like Yelp it or something, see which ones have the best reviews.
That's amazing. I didn't even think about doing that.
Good segue. When I was with the thing whose name you're forgetting, Zeal and Ardour.
Zeal and Ardour.
The second show we played was Psycho Las Vegas.
Okay.
And Las Vegas has just undergone this same legalization process, although they have not handled it particularly well. I remember reading all this stuff right when it happened about like crazy weed shortages, and they didn't have nearly enough supply.
I heard about this. Yeah.
So unlike dispensaries I've been to in Washington or Colorado or wherever, it wasn't that cheap. It wasn't like super cheap, although it was hilarious because this didn't happen when I was in Seattle. This guy came up and he goes like, "Hi, my name is Kevin. I'll be your bud tender today." And then the place had like all their own
bud tender,
like local strands, but they were completely sold out of everything that was like sort of on the reasonable side. But what they had in like a plethora of was like special like vape pens and gummies and all that sort of stuff. It was better for hanging out at a casino all day watching music.
Wow.
But it was it was pretty hilarious watching there's a lot of New York crew out there, guys who were playing, like a bunch of dudes who were playing with Merker and stuff like that who I knew, and everybody just eating gummies and watching music and walking around the casino days.
Sounds amazing. Tell me a little bit about the Zeal and Ardour gig.
So it's a really cool thing that this guy sort of essentially created. I don't know the entire story. I guess there was some sort of almost started as like a dare or a joke sort of impetus, but essentially what he did was he decided to combine like slave spiritual music and like gospel sort of music, and metal, and essentially gave the spiritual stuff this really dark sort of like satanic thing as opposed to like a godly thing,
right?
It's an interesting mix, and his voice, his singing voice is world class, just out of this world, and cool. It's the sort of voice that works really well for this sort of thing, because he's really a good singer, but he's also got this deep, gravelly, gruff sort of singing voice, and it's just sort of perfect. And it was a cool thing, he made an album by himself, and then it got some press and sort of exploded. So he put together a band of sort of Swiss musicians who were friends of his. So great band. We were listening to their rehearsals, getting ready for the thing, and they were killing it. But unfortunately, they had not even been a band for a year, and you need to be a band for something like 14 months to qualify for the sort of visas you need. So I think you're probably used to hearing the same stories I am of just constant, random getting refused visas sort of stuff for bands where they don't have any sort of good reason for not getting it.
Right.
This actually seems like it was a little more above board in that way, I guess.
Yeah, right.
But because the guy himself, Manu, is a dual citizen, he had no problem getting in. His manager was this really cool guy, actually, and was like essentially acted as tour manager, and was awesome. He's legally allowed to travel with them, and then their light guy kind of snuck his way on in, who was also an awesome dude. So the Swiss crew was great. It was a total whirlwind of like 4 shows across the country, with a lot of sort of unwieldy technical aspects. They had to rent a ton of gear to make the sort of backing track and in-ear systems work.
Oh boy!
Because it's not the sort of band where only I as a drummer have that. Everybody has a click in the backing track, and they needed a separate board for every show and all this sort of stuff. So there's a lot going on.
That could be problematic.
It definitely was. Like at Psycho, that festival was a tremendous amount of fun, but the logistics of playing it were absolutely insane.
Was stuff tempo mapped and stuff like that? Because there were big tempo changes?
No, there's none of the songs have any tempo changes.
Oh, good. Okay.
It's no tempo maps. It's all just a set BPM. But I had to sort of. I guess when he does this in Europe, it's a little better. He's got the drummer has some sort of like rolling pad that he hits to trigger the starts and stops of songs and stuff. But I had the dude's laptop with Ableton open.
Okay.
And sort of had like a quick tutorial when we were rehearsing this stuff is what buttons to press to make things start and stop, and mostly pulled it off okay.
Right.
There's a little bit of technical difficulties, but it was not really the vibe I'm used to, although it's fun to do. But I am grateful that there wasn't insane tempo changes and things like that. And, and whenever I'm doing stuff like that, also I just have the click raging in my ear. Yeah. Because that's what I want above all else.
Absolutely.
But
rehearsals
at Psycho we couldn't use it. They gave. Initially, when this band was scheduled to play, they gave us like a pretty decent amount of setup time and stuff like this, and we had rented equipment ahead of time and all this stuff. But then they changed the schedule, and they gave Windhand, the band before us, 5 minutes to break down and us 5 minutes to set up, and that was like the scheduled time, not the like, hey, we're running late on this show time. And then also had an amazing super pro sound dude that these guys hired for this gig, and all he needed from their crew was permission to use a splitter, basically, to use this other board, and they said no.
Really?
So and then we had, just with 5 minutes anyway, we were like, let's just play this like a show, which was kind of cool. But I also think incredible props to this dude Manu, because I don't think he's ever played a show like that, especially with this band.
Right.
And that's a pretty scary proposition in front of. I have no idea how many people actually watched, but it was like a 5,000 cap room. His second show with us, without using any of this stuff, and it certainly wasn't flawless on our part, but I think it went okay, and that was kind of the vibe of a lot of this stuff. It was a lot of stress and challenge, and I think everybody handled it really well.
Right.
And I think it came off well. I think we did him justice. At least I hope we did.
That's cool, man.
And, but now, he was back in Europe already playing shows. He went back like immediately after the New York show, which was the last show. Flew to England the next day to play like Leeds and Reading Festival, and
right,
taking off. And he seems like he's on the crazy upwards trajectory, and I hope it pays off for him. I think it will.
That's wild.
Cool stuff.
It's super cool that y'all got invited on that, because that's just I guess a 4-show run that y'all did, but it's likely to not happen again because his band should be able to come over.
Exactly. The next time they do a real American tour, they will almost certainly be able to get over. And this is a really professional crew, so I don't think they'll be unless it's just one of those random nopes that does happen. I don't really foresee them not getting visas for a different reason the next time. That probably will all be above board and work out. So yeah, it was cool. It's cool to be involved. It was a different and interesting thing to do. But yeah, probably that's that.
Nice.
But I hope we stay in touch and stuff. I really enjoyed the process, and as I said, all the guys who came over were awesome. The main guy was incredibly easygoing, incredibly easy to work with in a situation that could have been really unpleasant for everybody, and even way more stressful if that hadn't been the case. If he had come in and been a tyrant or freaking out about stuff, it would have been a nightmare, and he was the opposite. He was just totally cool and really appreciative of the fact that we were trying to make things work.
Nice.
So it was a cool vibe.
Cool, man. You've had a history of playing, it sounds like, a lot of heavy music, a lot of fast music. Mm-hmm. When did the Dark Lord tickle your grundle and lead you down the path of darkness?
Really, really early through the I think maybe somewhat cliche path of an older brother who had started to get into heavier music. But I distinctly remember, it's like, older generations talk. My dad knows where he was when he heard that Kennedy got assassinated. I know exactly where I was when I heard the double kick part in 1 for the first time as a kid.
Where were you?
I was in a car driving from Westchester to the city because my brother and another friend of his were going to see like an author. Who was it? It was the guy. He wrote those children's books where it's all like
Shel Silverstein?
Ferrets or like rats. It was like they were like kind of like children's fantasy books where all the characters were like anthropomorphized, like I feel like they were rodents, but I don't really remember. I don't remember the dude's name.
Know. I'm terrible at remembering children's books.
Yeah.
Other than Shel Silverstein and like a Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, this was like slightly older children's, like 10-year-olds, not like 5-year-olds, like in not poetry. They were like young adult novels sort of shit.
Oh, okay.
But that's. Still, I think I did all right for that question. But I was so into it.
Okay.
And so, I mean, that record is still kind of my favorite, right? And in a way, I can't separate from nostalgia versus how I'd respond to it if I heard it now for the first time.
Right.
But Justice will always kind of be my favorite.
Justice was the gateway.
Absolutely.
Have you heard the like re-release, or I don't know if somebody
the
Jason Justice for Jason?
It's fine. I don't.
There is a suspicious lack of bass.
I just saw a thing recently with Fleming Rasmussen where he was talking about like how absolutely it just got leached out in the mixing process, and how the initial tracks were great. But yeah, that record doesn't sound good, but
songs are killer.
I love the way it sounds. It's like it hits that spot of so many distinct memories of listening to it.
Yeah.
And maybe the guitar tone is weird and the kick drum tone is weird and all this stuff, but it all just works for me.
Yeah.
In a way that probably if I heard it now I'd be like, this is fucking terrible production.
Harvester of Sorrow is one of the songs that I revisit on that record. Mm-hmm. That's still, I'm like, God, it's one of the slower ones. It's just groovy.
But there's some choice moments and some good whispering.
Absolutely.
And My brother whose copy of Justice I would like routinely steal eventually sort of got out of metal, started branching out and listening to other things, and I just kind of rabbit holed. And I remember a few years after that, maybe early middle school, maybe when I was 12 or something, and so sort of knew Metallica, knew Slayer, and things like that. I read like a Modern Drummer interview with Pete Sandoval, and bought Formulas that had just come out like that week or something like that, and it just warped me. I'd never heard anything like that, and I couldn't comprehend what the hell I was hearing at any level. It took me so many listens just to hear it as music and to be able to process the music of it. In the same way, Slayer actually was the same for the first few times I heard Slayer, anything that fast. I didn't know how to listen to it. It took a while for my ears to be able to understand what I was hearing and how to count it and figure out what the music was.
Right. Everybody was so Satan crazy in the 80s that when I first heard Slayer, that was sort of my lead into it. I was like, oh yeah, these are the Satanists. And now in hindsight, I'm like, not so much.
No, it's funny. You hear a lot of people who sort of got into it through not necessarily that angle, but from like, I'm looking for like evil shit, or I want some like dangerous music. And for me, it was almost started out as kind of a nerdier thing, and I got into it backwards, where I was already sort of into drumming and things like that, and then I got obsessed with what I was hearing of this sort of drumming, and then sort of developed more of a taste or at least a tolerance for like
it is a bit of a tolerance,
the silly or evil, dangerous aspects of stuff. But yeah, my like pull into more extreme metal was always sort of being drummer obsessed as a kid, and already being super into that.
What age did you start playing then?
I think I was around 9.
Really?
Both my aforementioned brother and I, we had to do some sort of music stuff when we were kids.
Okay.
It was like one of the parental rules, and we both.
Were either your parents musicians?
No. They both had. My dad at least had taken piano lessons as a kid and like absolutely hated it.
Oh, really?
And my mom plays guitar a little bit, but I think they just thought it was like I think they thought it was like responsible parenting, like a good Renaissance man sort of thing to do for us. And I was resentful when we started, for sure, because I missed like kickball every Saturday.
Right.
I never made it to any of those games, but I mean, they probably are deeply regretful now of the path that it sent me on, but I'm extremely grateful. But for a second, I also took piano, and I had this incredibly kindly, like legally blind piano teacher.
Really?
Who just played from memorization of keys basically, and I think could kind of read music. Being legally blind, she had a little bit of vision.
Right.
But couldn't like sight read, couldn't read music and play at the same time.
Wow.
But just knew every piece, that sort of thing.
Wow.
And she was like the nicest lady in the world until my sort of total apathy and laziness for that instrument just caught up. And she never got mean, but she definitely got frostier.
Yeah.
But I'd be sitting there having not practiced at all, and sort of it should have been a piece at like, let's say 140 BPM or something. I'm going like, what's the next note? Okay. Looking at my hands and just crawling through.
Right.
So eventually I'm like, I hate this. I want to quit. And the folks were like, you can, but you have to pick something else.
Oh.
I said, I think I want to bang on shit. And
yeah.
And they said, okay. And that was that pretty much. So around 9, I started taking drum lessons, bought like a incredibly cheap Fall Apart beater set about maybe 6-7 months after that. And
were you playing it in the house?
Yeah, at that point we had a house. We moved to the city a couple years after that.
Okay.
But at that point there was a basement where the drums existed.
Nice. That's awesome. They don't have basements in the South, so you just, I don't know if they were able to soundproof it all to tune your fucking banging, crashing shit out. I don't know how my parents dealt with it, because it was right up in the house, man. Jesus.
Yeah, no, I mean, when we moved here, I grew up in Manhattan and just had the drum set up in the apartment, and essentially at some point went around to all my neighbors and was like, I would like to be able to bang on shit between these hours and these hours. Is this okay? And sort of found the window every afternoon when I got home from school that sort of worked, but I'd still get every once in a while somebody would like start yelling at me from like across the street, or folks would say like when they turned the corner they could hear me from across town.
That's amazing. You were ever able to get away with that in the first place.
It's unbelievable that I got away with it. It's unbelievable that I wasn't like way more self-conscious about it too. Because I wasn't, I was getting okay, but I certainly was pretty shitty still by any metric, and just slamming away with like thousands of captive listeners, not really thinking about it. Just having a good time.
It's part of being that age. I certainly wasn't thinking about it. The only thing I was thinking about was probably tits and music and beating on drums. It was like three things.
There you go.
So I guess at which point did you start playing with Krallice? Because you've been playing with that band for quite some time now.
It's been just about 10 years now. We were doing the math recently. I had known Colin for a few years before that. Nick and I, the bassist, we went to high school together and then ended up at the same university and played in like a death metal band there together and stuff like that. So
Where'd you go to school?
University of Chicago.
Oh, okay.
Grew up here, went there for school, was out there for about a year after working.
How was it studying and the whole academia of it all?
It was okay. That school is real over in that direction. It's extremely sort of nerdy and academic, and people sort of hole up and mummify themselves in the library sort of place. And I didn't have that experience. I actually had a pretty good time. I played a lot of music.
Okay.
Although I did no music through school, it was all just my own fun pursuits basically.
Were you taking lessons though?
That's only every once in a while when I came back to the city.
Really?
I took pretty much all throughout high school and most of middle school I had the same teacher, and by most of high school I was taking like it was almost like a cool I don't know almost a apprenticeship-y sort of thing at times. But I was sort of learning how to freelance and how to teach, and also just taking like maybe like 5 hours of lessons from this guy a week.
Wow.
And sort of just palling around. I kind of stopped when I went to school. I was, or at least much less heavily, would sort of maybe reconvene every once in a while when I was back in town. But essentially was just playing for the first time without really being consistently in lessons. But we through a friend that Nick made at school a year before I got there, we knew Colin for a couple of years prior to involvement playing with him, and then I moved back a little earlier, started jamming with them, and so Nick's not really on the first Krallice record. He has like literally one deep bellowy vocal on the song. But between Mick and Colin, they tracked all the bass for that record, and then when he moved back, it was pretty much just always kind of going to be the way, but he just came in on bass. So between the first and second record, essentially.
Prior to Krallice, had you played sort of really fast stuff like that before? Or was that kind of your foray into?
It was my foray into more of the supremely long form stuff like that.
Some long ass songs.
But I had random metal bands growing up here, and Nick and I had like sort of a techie, like an old school techie death metal band out in Chicago.
Okay.
So I had and then we had later in Chicago we had played with this actually quite fast joke but not joke band. That was a lot of fun. There was this band called Sallah, Sallah, which was this sort of like black thrash band that was all Indiana Jones themed.
Really?
Yeah. So Sala's like the he's like the what's that guy's name? Jonathan Rhys Davies, I think, the big blustery guy.
Yeah.
Who's that's his character's name in the first movie.
Really?
So everybody in the
That's
band
impressive.
had to have like a moniker of a villain from an Indiana Jones movie.
What was yours?
I went through a few because I was out of town when they sort of formed up, and they had done some like drum machine demos. I was like, I absolutely want in on this.
Yeah.
So, but I was a little late to like the picking of the villain names. They're like, you can be what's his name? Donovan, who's like the like schmoozy rich American Nazi sympathizer.
Right.
And Last Crusade. I was like, oh, that dude sucks. I don't want to be Donovan. I was like, I'll be Hitler. I can be Hitler. I'm a Jew. I could get away with it. And they're like, you cannot choose Hitler. So I was like, I think his name, we looked him up in the credits. I think his name was like Baraka, who's like the guy with the evil monkey. In the first movie, I was him for a while. And then I was, who's also just listed this way in the credits, the mean Mongolian. Who's like the guy he fights in the bar scene in the first movie. Yeah. So that kind of stuff. So for most of my time in that band, I was the mean Mongolian.
Wow. Actually called the mean Mongolian. Was that was what he was called in the movie?
He's never mentioned, but in the credits, that's
the mean Mongolian.
Yeah. It's the same guy who's like, he also is the guy who got killed by the chopper blades.
Oh, right.
In that movie, he's the guy who gets like smushed in the mine in the second movie.
Okay.
And I know something happens to him in the third movie. He's like the stunt guy who's definitely in all of the movies.
Oh, that's amazing.
But that band was fun as hell. But it was ripping. It was really fast. But it was never. It was on the whole definitely faster than Krallice. At least Krallice at that point. But the amount of time I would need to play any particular thing I was playing was a lot less of an amount of time. It was much more sort of rapid, frenetic changing of pace. Right. As was Astomodis, the sort of techie death band we had. It wasn't slow, although it never was crazy fast, but it was a lot of sort of jagged shifting of parts. Whereas Krallice was maybe one of the first bands where it really required me to just live in whatever I was doing to respect the music. If the riff is however endless measures long the riff is, what I play should have something to do with that. I shouldn't be changing constantly if the riff isn't changing constantly. I should be working with that. And also, I certainly wasn't and still am very much not responsible entirely for the drum writing in that band. Depending on who's writing the song, it changes a lot. But we almost were always sort of trial and erroring and trying lots of stuff in the room and seeing what we all like. Regardless, and also for a lot of the material like Colin writes, he'll write like really sophisticated drum programming to it to begin with. And most of the time I'll leave it alone because it's great. I try to get my ego out of the way in that respect, and if unless it's something that I really feel is alien to me, which is very rare these days because he's kind of over time very much added increasingly my idiosyncrasies into the way he programs drums for the band. But
so there's been the synthesis of your playing and
totally.
The electronic.
He knows my quirks for sure. But usually what he writes I think is awesome, and I'm not going to change it just on the principle of the fact that I didn't come up with it.
Yeah.
So I'll make it my own in various ways, but a lot of the ideas are not very far removed from what was there originally, but that's always been some slice of the amount of songs because everybody writes and not even for all of his songs do we do it that way, but it's always some sort of committee process, and I'm always very interested and open to what those guys have to say. They're all really smart thinkers, I think, about drum parts, and it's also really helpful because it gives me an insight into how they're thinking about their riffs in a way that can be very useful when you're dealing with weird fucking riffs.
Oh yeah. Did it take any shifting of technique to play some of those longer parts as you mentioned?
Yeah,
the speed and the length.
It really made me what it really made me do was really think about in a deeper way my sort of approach and process of technique and think about the way I was playing and what I needed to do.
Yeah.
And I think I think over the years it's been more of a less of a shifting and more of a sort of diving in, if that makes sense. But definitely thought a lot about and this is to me sort of a constant and interesting but also incredibly frustrating paradox of playing music and playing this music the way I want to, is that I want to be hitting in a certain way. I gravitate to metal playing that still feels aggressive.
Right.
It still feels like there's force behind it, and that it's respecting the sort of overall extremity of the music.
Right.
But there are massive limitations to how physical you can be and still play at certain speeds and play for a long time. But one thing that I've really realized over the years is that part of that seems the most counterintuitive is not that. One thing I discovered that kind of makes sense and kind of doesn't is that when I was trying to sort of blast for long times with bigger arm motions, feeding my sort of smaller motions of the wrist and stuff, it actually makes it a lot more sustainable. It sort of follows. I'm certainly not none the least bit qualified to talk about this stuff from like a scientific or sports medicine or whatever sort of perspective, but it kind of makes sense to me that if you're only using your small muscle groups in the same ways over and over again, that's the kind of repetitious motion that causes the sort of stuff that kills people who work at keyboards all day long.
Definitely
carpal tunnel
Absolutely.
and tendonitis and stuff like that. But by virtue of sort of breaking that motion up by letting it be an extension of a larger sort of whip of the arm and that sort of stuff, you're at the very least creating a sort of almost 50-50 sort of motion.
It's definitely more balanced, for sure.
Where you're just taking off the strain of the workload, and you're letting those small muscles get fed by bigger muscle groups in a way that kind of makes everything easier. So what I discovered was I could still play hard for long periods of time in a way that once I sort of made my peace and got used to it, I actually found it a lot easier than trying to play more minimally. I feel it's more sustainable.
But how much whipping or upper arm playing can there even be with just blast beat, long duration blast beat stuff?
For me, the way I want, one thing that's kind of also an answer to that question of how technique changed in terms of dealing with this stuff. One thing that's become a little bit of an obsession over the years is this notion of like almost a theory of everything, or like a holistic approach to how to do all this stuff on drums. So for me, a blast beat isn't any different than how I play a single stroke roll on the kit or do anything else. So I think there can be a lot of whip involved. If anything, as I get faster, sometimes the almost jelly spastic movements of the upper arm increase. They don't get smaller; they get bigger. I use more sort of weird stuff to feed what's happening here. It's all still about. I'm saying here and pointing to my wrist as if you can see on a podcast.
Right.
It's all still about the small motion groups, but I'm absolutely doing this.
Okay.
To feed it, I'm letting my whole arm move and whip, and I'm not. The idea is as long as it's relaxed, as long as it's loose, totally loose, I'm not introducing strain by doing that, and I'm really helping out my wrist from taking all the strain. This almost occurred to me before, I think maybe even before blasting, when I was trying to do like really fast shuffle patterns with one hand, and not playing them without a pulse, without a feel. I noticed how nuts my arm motion became. And kind of went with it, So if I'm trying to do that sort of thing, if I'm actually up here on the hi-hat doing that, my whole upper arm really sort of wings out when I'm doing it to get the swing of it. So it's not like so it doesn't sound like a drum machine at fast beat. So it still has a lilt and a pulse. The arm moves a lot. Basically, what I'm doing at all times is some sort of, depending on how you define molar, sort of pseudo-molar idea.
It's distributing it for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. But I almost no finger involvement whatsoever.
Interesting.
Yeah, pretty much across the board. I it's almost all wrist and arm feeding wrist.
Have you figured out more of this stuff as well in teaching and giving lessons, having to sort of analyze it?
It's amazing how much that opens up your own perceptions of what you do and how
Right.
you think about stuff. It's teaching and working with people and figuring out how to, for one thing, you learn how to explain what you do, and in doing so, you come to a much deeper understanding of what it is that you do, how you play.
Right.
I had been sort of skirting around a lot of notions of ideas of technique and stuff and never really thought about them in a solid way. They were sort of more amorphous thoughts or random opinions or whatever. And through teaching and through conveying how I think about stuff, they kind of started to become more cohesive in a way, which is really cool. And also, you just have to, one of the things that teaching, I think, really instructs the teacher to do effectively is come up with multifaceted ways of explaining the same thing. The bottom line is I could explain a concept to you in a way where you instantly get it, but if I use that same explanation for somebody else, they might say, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
Sure.
And I have to know, 3 or 4 other ways of saying the exact same thing, and explaining rhythmic concepts. And it also teaches you how to simplify the way you talk about complicated things, and both in terms of how you talk about it and how you process it cerebrally when you're playing. A classic example that I use a lot with students or just talking to people in general about drumming or music is you can talk about something like the classic eighth note triplet against eighth note polyrhythm as a difficult independence exercise, doing.
Yeah, sure.
But it's a hell of a lot easier to talk about that as just two hands playing the 16th note pattern together. You're like 1E and the 2E and the 3E and the 4E.
Sure.
Thinking about the commonality of how you're moving, of what you're playing, as opposed to the things that make it different. I could also count that, as you would if you were playing it as a polyrhythm. I could count either head. I could count 1 triplet, 2 triplet,
Right.
1 and 2 and. But that's needless for just playing this rhythm and making it sound good, and understanding the linkages between limbs and the way things work together physically, I think is really useful, and teaching has really helped me come to an understanding of that through trying to convey these things to other people. And I think what it also teaches you to do is which I think is incredibly useful for any musician, is just be really as honest as you can be with yourself about what your strengths and weaknesses are, and also convey those weaknesses to the people you're working with. I don't try to pretend that I'm amazing. I try to talk about the things I struggle with and the things that I find difficult, and the mechanisms that I've used to overcome that to the extent I have, because that's what I want to hear from drummers. Want, and that's usually when I nerd out with other drummers, especially other sort of metal drummers, the conversations also often come down to the sort of hardships of figuring this stuff out, and the frustrations that we all have trying to play music that's sort of hard for humans to play. And I'm very much on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of speediness and things like that. There are guys who absolutely lap me, but it's still for all of us. I think you're figuring it out, and you're also drawing that line for yourself of what sort of techniques you want to use and how much you want technique to change to accommodate speed. And for me, I think I made my peace with the fact that I still want to get faster and faster, but I want to do it using a certain set of techniques that I know are aggressive and loud,
right,
and have velocity, and not make that switch to a lighter sort of playing that is absolutely necessary to reach certain speed thresholds. I'm never going to be the guy who plays in excess of 250. It's just not going to happen, and that's okay. But I do want to be the guy always who, if you see me at a house show with no mics, you can hear me.
Right. That's an important distinction to make, because that's one of the things that I've noticed. It's at certain speeds, and with some of the stuff, to achieve those speeds, you have to play at such a low volume that once you take mics away, you can't hear them.
Yeah.
So that's a problem.
And that's the reality. It's something that it's not really fair to be critical of in a certain way, because there is no other way to do it.
Right.
It's just physics at a certain level. You can't play that fast with
right.
volume. And you do have to start making, I think, compromises to how you move, how you play, in a way that I very much respect the guys who shed and get there, but it's kind of not for me. It's not the way I want to be playing, but it is frustrating. I'd love to be able to take the way I play to that place, but there are limitations, and there always will be.
Right.
But I like the physical struggle of playing. I enjoy the process of just keep pushing and working it.
Yeah. With Krallice, you were telling me it sounds like you have recorded some more stuff that could be coming out at some point.
Probably pretty soon, at least the first batch. So we kind of, in a weird sort of cross formation, have just made 2 records. The first that's going to be, we'll probably release fairly soon. I'm really stoked about. It's the material we worked a lot more. It's the stuff we've been working on for the past bunch of months. Pretty much since we made a record just about a year ago.
Right.
And this is like the mostly the crop of stuff since then is the first one, and we spent a lot of time fine-tuning these songs and making micro changes and having a lot of fun, and I really like the material. And then we got Dave Edwardson, bassist of Neurosis, to do vocals on the whole thing.
Really?
And he killed it, and it sounds amazing.
Whoa.
And he also contributed all the synth stuff that we just put in, and I just got a mix yesterday, and I'm beyond stoked. It sounds really cool.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so we recorded the music for that over Memorial Day at the end of May, and then he came after Neurosis finished their run early last month. His last show was in Philly after some New York shows, so he just came back and went into the studio and did vocals. So that one's pretty much done. It still needs to be, I think, maybe the mix is done, maybe one more, and then finished up. But it should be out, I think, fairly soon, because usually we just sort of vomit this stuff out once we're done with it. And then around the same time, we made another record, which is sort of a different batch of material that's maybe a less insane, mathy sort of stuff, maybe a little more of an older vibe in some ways. In fact, one of the songs is a reinterpretation of a mixed, really old one-man black metal project. This band Beastlore, one of the songs he did, we took and Kralliceized or something.
Okay.
But the idea of this one was to kind of not work the material as much, as just to sort of see what happens when we just learn stuff really quickly or barely know it and just play down. And what ended up happening, which was kind of insane but also kind of fun, was sort of the most complex thing on this guy we spent the least amount of time on, and it felt super decadent and really fun. When I got back from the Zeal and Ardour thing just a couple weeks ago, I went right into the studio to finish the tracking for that second record, and we recorded sort of the second half of a song, which is sort of its own thing, and then this other massive song that we had never played start to finish. And I was in the studio looking at sheet music, playing it down, and then we kind of memorized it and did some takes and then changed some stuff and then played it, and it was a really fun process, but it was also absurd.
This whole workflow of Krallice just sounds fucking insane.
I mean, it's great. But it's also, I'm not responsible. I'm just the guy who's perpetually behind those guys' machine of creating music. But it's so much fun that it's just, they're so prolific and it's what comes out of them is so much fun to work on. But that one I think is pretty much done with principal tracking. I think there might be a couple more vocal things to do and maybe some tweaks, but essentially also probably not far from seeing the light of day.
Awesome.
So it should be a lot of fun. I'm pretty stoked on all this stuff.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear it. Tell me a little bit more about some other projects that you got going on. I know you're drumming in quite a few projects.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have a problem saying no, and I've really enjoyed, especially the last few years, just filling up all my potential time with bands. So I've got 4 other things going on besides Krallice at the moment. I've got Gary on, which is a side project with the bassist of Krallice. It's like a weird death metal drum and bass duo thing. And then Anacon, which is sort of a more traditional black metal band, kind of in faster melodic Dawn, the section-y sort of vibe. And definitely with some like Destroyer 666 and stuff like that in there. Whoa, which is a long-standing excellent band by my buddy Chris Grigg. He started doing stuff again sort of early last year. We made a record which came out I guess last March, and working on new stuff. And Pyrolatris, which is sort of this I don't know, maybe more in the thrashy end of black metal-y sort of stuff, with maybe a little death metal also, with my friend Nick Pomerado,
formerly of Hull.
And it was initially just the two of us, and then we made it a full band recently with guitar player from Anacon, Nolan, and our friend Joe Morolla on bass. And
not to be confused with the drummer Joe Morello.
Not to be confused with Joe Morello.
You resurrected Joe Morello? He's playing in your band?
Neither Tom Morello, who has had some unfortunate confluences with. So, yeah. I think I got
I think
up.
that's it. That's five bands.
That was five, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. So,
it sounds like more rehearsing than I would ever want to have to deal with. Is what that sounds like.
Yes, but I like that. And I just schedule them as much as I can, all in sort of a big block of rehearsing. Usually, I'll sort of, depending on how the day works and what people's schedules are, I'll have some rehearsing and then have a block of teaching and then more rehearsing, or a bunch of teaching and then just rehearse for the rest of the night. I've always found that until maybe a certain point, the more I play, the better I feel behind the drums. It doesn't really start to have diminishing returns. I just always feel more and more comfortable the more I play.
Yeah.
So having these long stretches of lots of bands rehearsing, I really enjoy it, because I always feel like no matter what my physical frustrations might be when I sit down when I'm starting that first rehearsal, by the time I'm in the second one, I usually feel pretty good and I'm enjoying playing music, and I like the process of rehearsing. I like shedding, I guess.
Yeah. Fucking A, man. Well, it sounds like we covered just about everything, and going forward, it sounds like you got no shortage of projects, rehearsals, releases, recordings, teachings, sheds, single strokes, all stress, physical shit.
Yeah, that's
the whole thing.
I think you just pretty much summed up my existence.
There it is. Right on. Well, Lev, thanks for talking to me, man.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jody.
Yeah, man. All right, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to Lev for coming and hanging in Greenpoint and talking. It was a good time, and definitely no shortage of information and creative pursuits with that guy. My God. Dude likes to stay busy. Sounds complicated sometimes. In any case, be sure to check out any of his many projects. He's always, if not recording and rehearsing and teaching, then he's touring. So he's a good guy to catch up with, and check him out. He rules. Thanks again, Lev. Thanks again for the listeners. Another one in the books. Crash, bang, boom!